All right, so as Zane is passing out Bibles, Danny talked a little bit about what last week?
I wasn't here.
Between creation and the flood. That's right. Thanks, Zane. So this week we're going to focus on a few guys and their families and kind of how they point to Jesus, just like Danny talked last week about how everything up to Noah kind of pointed to the flood. But first, I've got a quick video for you guys.
Primeval history was the first 11 chapters of Genesis. The rest of Genesis is patriarchal history. Pastor Paul, what is a patriarch?
I know this one.
Ian, what are you doing?
I know this one. If you have a...
Primeval history was the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Primeval history was the first 11 chapters of Genesis. The rest of Genesis is patriarchal history. Pastor Paul, what is a patriarch?
I know this one.
Ian, what are you doing?
I know this one. If you have a lot of donuts or danishes and there is a flood, you need a big boat to save them. That boat is called a patriarch.
You're kidding me, right?
I didn't say patriarch, I said patriarch. Pastor Paul?
I thought I had that one.
He's not with me.
Yes. A patriarch is the male head or father of a family.
Well, what if it's a mother?
Then it's the matriarch.
Well, what do you know? So patriarchal history is the story of God working through a series of fathers to save the world.
All right. So I love what's in the Bible, if you guys haven't realized. But so we're going to open up our Bibles today, and we're going to be in there quite a bit. Why don't you guys open up to Genesis 12? We're going to have quite a few people read today. But just as a quick intro to where we're going to be at, in chapter 11 of Genesis is when we're introduced to this guy named Abram, which is the first guy that we're going to focus on. So I need somebody to read the first 3 chapters of Genesis 12. Daniel, you can... first 3 verses of Genesis 12. It should be on the screen, maybe? There we go.
The Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous." And you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on the earth will be blessed through you.
There we go. Okay, so a couple of things. Notice the sequence of events there. The first thing that God says to Abram is not you're going to have these blessings. What does he do? Go, yeah. He gives him a directive. He doesn't ask them, he asks him to obey. And what he's asking him to do is not an easy thing, right? He asks him to pick up all of his stuff away from his family and go to somewhere where he's never lived before. How many of you guys think that would be easy? Yeah, I think I've never been to Brazil. If God told me to get up and move to Brazil, that'd be really scary to me. I don't know the language. There's a whole bunch of things, and that's kind of a similar situation to what God asks of Abram. But he does promise a couple things to Abram along with those directives. He gives a whole bunch of promises there, but I'm just going to focus on 2 because we're going to circle back to him in a little bit. Zane, do you want to say something? Yeah, he's telling him to go, right? Yeah. So 2 of the promises in the beginning of verse 2, what does he say? Yeah, I will make you into a great nation, which is interesting at this point because Abram doesn't have any kids, and he's 75 years old, which we'll get to in a sec. But the end of verse 3, it says, all the families on earth will be blessed through you. So keep those 2 in mind. We'll circle back later. Can I have somebody read the next 4 verses? Zane, yeah. So 4 through 7.
So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed to the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem, and there he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites.
One more. Yep.
Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "I will give this land to your descendants." And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Thanks, Zane. All right, so Abram gets up and he travels across like Asia a little bit. How old is he when he travels? Ancient. Can you give me a number? 75. Thank you. So he is 75 and he has 0 kids at this point. How many of you guys know somebody that's like 75 years old? Yeah, a few. Can you imagine them having kids at 75 years old? Yeah, it seems a bit scary to me. I'm 40, and the thought of me having a child at this age is like frightening. But, you okay there, Danny? All right. Yeah, but Abraham trusts God at his word. Now, time goes on, and Abram still doesn't have any kids. So we're going to pick up in Genesis 15, so flip a couple pages over, and we're going to read verses 1 through 6. I need another reader. Ike, you can read. Sorry, people in the front row give priority because I'm old and slow. Yep.
Some later time, the Lord spoke to Abraham in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abraham, for I will protect you and reward you will be great." But Abraham replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of
Damascus,
a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no
descendants
of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir."
Mm-hmm.
Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servants will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abraham outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteousness because of his faith.
Thanks. All right. So Abraham has these like honest questions for God, right? God has promised him this giant nation, and Abram's like, "Hey, God, yeah, I don't have any kids, so I'm not really sure how that's going to work out. And all this stuff that I've got, it's all going to go to my servant because I don't have any kids," right? He shares that he's upset. He shares his concerns. And those seem pretty legitimate to us, right? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. But God asks Abram to continue to trust in him. And he does. Well, at least for a little while. So time goes on, 10 years go down, he's now 85 years old. And Sarai notices that she hasn't been able to get pregnant, hasn't been able to give Abram a son. So she takes matters into her own hands. And she tells Abram to make a child through her servant Hagar. So Abram does, and we get this child called Ishmael. Now Abram can have this huge family through this child, right? Well, not quite. So God intended this giant family to be through Abram's wife, Sarai. So we fast forward another 13, 14 years, and Abraham and Sarah, because they both like underwent name changes, they're now about 100 years old and 90 years old. And God promises them a son, which we talked about people that you might know that are 75, like having a kid. Anybody know anybody that's still living that's 100 or 90? Yeah, like in my mind, they're usually old, they're very frail. So the thought of them having a kid is even more like just bonkers to me. But that's what God promised to Abram and Sarah. God promised, hold on. All right. So anyways, Sarah does end up having a kid, and this kid is named Isaac. So here finally is the son that Abraham was promised long ago. Took 25 years to actually happen, but through Isaac, he can finally have these descendants that are as numerous as stars in the sky. Through the story of Abraham, we can get all sorts of different pointers to Jesus. God promised to give a nation with many descendants to Abraham, and he does make this happen. It takes a long time, but he does make it happen through Isaac. God promised to give a blessing through the whole earth to Abraham, and I don't know of a better blessing than Jesus. Abraham came before the law of Moses, but he was counted as righteous by God because of his faith. When Jesus comes, he continually reaffirms that we are not made right with God by obeying the law, but by trusting in him, the Son of God. So we'll pick back up kind of with the story. So we're going to flip forward a couple chapters to Genesis 22. Before Isaac gets too old, we get kind of a weird, scary turn in the story. So I need somebody to read a couple verses from me. Emma, yeah, you get to read the fun part. 22, 1 and 2. I'm just going to stay here. Go ahead.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called out. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you.
Thanks. Anybody else want to read over here? Hannah. Okay, just hold on to it for a sec. All right. So I always read this story, and I'm always like, wait, what? We finally get this son in Isaac, and all of a sudden God asks asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. Like we read all through the Old Testament about how there were pagan nations that were sacrificing children, and yet that's what appears to be happening here by God asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. It just seems wrong on so many levels, right? But we keep reading. So Hannah, can you read 22, 6 through 8?
So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife, as two of them walked on together. 7. Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, the boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son, Abraham answered, and they both walked on together.
All right, thanks. So Isaac is kind of old enough at this point to realize that something's up, right? He asks a question. Hey, Dad, we've got the wood. Where's the sheep that we're going to sacrifice? And yet, during this whole section, this is the only recorded statement that we have from Isaac. Even as he is eventually being tied up on top of this wood pile by his dad, we don't hear any complaints, no screams. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. We don't really know. Maybe he just trusted God and his dad more than kind of all that. I know I'm kind of reading in between the lines at this point, but Isaac at this point, he's able to carry the wood. He's probably a teenager. Wood's pretty heavy to carry. I have kids around this age. My 10-year-old probably wasn't going to be able to carry enough wood for a fire, so he's got to be fairly big, fairly strong. And if he's that old, I feel like he's got to be a willing participant in whatever his dad has asked him to do. I don't know any 15-year-olds that wouldn't be able to get away from a 115-year-old if they didn't want to, right? So we've got that going on. Isaac had to be kind of willing to be part of this exercise. But God doesn't let Abraham go through with it. God stops Abraham just before he's ready to kill Isaac, and he provides a sheep as an offering, a substitute offering, instead of his son. So how do we see pointers in this story to Jesus? Well, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his one and only son by faith. Jesus was God's only son, and he did sacrifice his life for us all. Isaac points to Jesus. He was willing to lay down his life by faith. A lot of the times I think I hear that Jesus laid down his life so much that I forget like the gravity of the situation. But when I read this story, I realize just how like crazy God's love is for us. For a son to be willing to for a father to be willing to let his son die. It just brings everything back into perspective when it comes to Jesus. Jesus is our sacrificial lamb, like Abraham had planned for Isaac to be. So, anyways, Isaac grows up and he actually has twin boys of his own, Esau and Jacob. And even though Esau is older and his dad's favorite, Jacob is the one that ends up getting his dad's blessing. Jacob ends up moving away because he's scared of his brother that he's going to kill him because he took his blessing, which was kind of like their inheritance of the day. And he ends up marrying two sisters, Leah and Rachel. And by the standards of the day, he gets really rich. He's got lots of possessions, lots of livestock. He's got a dozen boys, not including other daughters. There's a ton to Jacob's story, and we don't have time to cover it all. It would take a long time. But this is where we get to see the blessing that God promised to Abraham really start to take root. Jacob has this huge family, and he lives in the country that God had promised to Abraham. They eventually become the nation of Israel. Israel was another name for Jacob. And Judah, who is one of Jacob's sons, he's eventually the great, like 35 times great grandfather of Jesus. The blessing that God promised to the whole world happens through Jacob and his family. Those promises that God made to Abraham, they're beginning to take shape. God's rescue plan for the whole world is in process. Now, while we talk a lot of, we kind of put these guys up on a pedestal a lot, we look up to them a lot, I do also want to point out that these guys were far from perfect. In the Bible, we have clear evidence of them lying multiple times. Like, we have Abraham and Isaac, they both lied to kings and sent their wives to be with the king because they were a little scared of what might happen. We've got Jacob, who lied to his blind dad about who he was. He pretended to be Esau. And not only that, these three guys had children through at least 7 different women, which is a clear contradiction to what we believe: one husband, one wife for a lifetime, right? So why do we look up to them? Well, remember one thing. First, these guys came about before the law was given, so they didn't have the clear outline of what we know to be right and wrong. Now, I'm not saying what they did was right, but it's easy for us to point out their failures in light of that stuff. The one thing that they do have in common is that they continually trusted in God. They weren't perfect by any means, but they sought after God, and they sought after his presence. Their faith is what set them apart. That is ultimately why we look up to them. They continually trusted in God. So small group time is going to look a little different this week. I'm going to ask you guys to read through Romans 4. In it, Paul will kind of lay out why Abraham and his faith, it points us to Jesus. Jesus is our ultimate model of having faith in God. Jesus came, he set aside his own desires, and he went to death on a cross for us all so that we could be made right with God. He had faith that God has his and our best interests at heart when he did that. And Jesus coming back to life was God's stamp of approval that Jesus was absolutely right about the things that he said. So as we go forward, let's try to have faith like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And let's try to live every day like Jesus did. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to break into small groups. Bow your heads. God, we thank you for the examples of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their faith in you, God, but we also thank you that you've written down their failures too, because we know that we do not have to be perfect to be able to come before you and seek after you, God. But God, I pray that you help us to have faith like they did. Help us to live in close community with you and to seek after you continually, day after day. In your name, amen.